Hello, my name is Jim. This is my podcast, The Bloody Vegans. You're very welcome to it. Each week, I'll be travelling ever deeper into the world of veganism, discovering along the way a multitude of viewpoints from the political and ethical to the practical. I'll be doing this through a series of conversations, each aiming to further illuminate my understanding and hopefully yours of all things plant-centric. This week is no different. Well, actually, it's a little bit different because I've got two guests this week. I'm joined by Dr Shireen Kassam, the founder and director of Plant-Based Health Professionals UK, a non-profit organisation whose mission is to provide evidence-based education to healthcare professionals as well as the general public on plant-based nutrition and its many, many benefits to kind of promoting healthy lifestyles and also to preventing and treating chronic disease. I'm also joined this week by Ryan Alexander, the founder, alongside his partner Guy, of the No Meat May campaign. No Meat May is a registered charity that aims to help people eliminate meat from their diets, initially for 31 days, with the kind of ultimate goal, I guess, of helping people potentially transition into veganism for all of the reasons that we often talk about on this podcast, whether it be our health, the sustainability of the environment, ending violence against non-human animals, and also food security, sustaining our ability to survive on our wonderful planet. So without further ado, here's a conversation between me, Dr. Shireen Kassam, and Ryan Alexander, the founder of No Meat May.
I speak at in Sydney Opera House about his book Eating Animals, and I went along with a mate, and we sort of was this called the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. It was basically they'd have speakers talk about concepts that were, I guess, challenging the way the world works. And I walked out of this 1 hour talk just with, I guess, my mind blown in the terms of understanding the impact of animal agriculture and our overconsumption of meat in so many areas, and it was, we talk about No Meat May being 4 big reasons, and what I sort of took out of that talk and out of Jonathan's book was obviously, health, environmental, also the cruelty of the immense violence of factory farming, but also food security and how inefficient our system of producing food is, particular animal products versus plant protein. So sort of that was sort of the spark for me, and then it was my journey to veganism was pretty fast from there. It probably took 18 months or so of me sort of finding my way, reading up about nutrition, because I just couldn't understand how you could be healthy, as a vegan. I guess went against everything I'd been taught. So it was sort of this process of unlearning, which I think is common for everyone to learn a new way, and you unlearn things one step at a time. And then the documentary started, and I read a few more books, and it's sort of at the time, and my current partner as well is a long-term vegetarian. He's my co-founder who works on No Meat May with me, and so I was sort of at home eating really good vegetarian food, and I was going out with my mates eating steaks and $5 steak nights, and getting my meat fix out of the house, but then eating this great veggie food at home. And in a very kind of, I don't know, like it wasn't like it was my own time, I guess, which I think is important as well, making your own learning as you go. But yeah, essentially, No Meat May came out of that, and I think like your blog that you have here, Jim, is sort of learning what you learn and sharing that with others. So I think No Meat May was sort of set up to challenge people to go a month without meat. Very much no judgment. Very much a supportive and fun. We also make sure we try and keep it fun and light and playful, because it's a lot of serious stuff in the world. So that's sort of our approach to it. But yeah, so we kicked it off in 2013 as a bit of a challenge. We had like 20 to 30 of our mates we challenged, and most people thought we were mad by suggesting giving up meat for a month, and since then it's sort of just doubled or tripled every year in terms of participation, as obviously this movement is growing in terms of shifting to more plant-based food, and the awareness is rising. So and I think probably one of the other key things for me was just understanding it's okay. I had my own personal revolution of finding veganism, but and a big part of it, I think, was the environmental aspects and understanding how we're basically warming up the globe, and we were cutting down our forests and destroying our oceans, and it's all well and good that I make a personal revolution, sort of I opt out of that and or try and have a lighter footprint, but it was this realization that's not good enough. We need mass cultural change, and we need to move pretty fast. So it was sort of thinking about how I could bring my skills and my experience to activism, and that was where No Meat May came out of, as this sort of fun challenge. And I'd worked in fundraising and charity sector for a number of years in running supporting mass participation events. So I could sort of see how these things grow and how important the creative is and engaging people. And so we've just sort of stumbled along as we go, learning each year and sort of improving it. And and this year's sort of really taken off, which is great. But it's kind of and I think we've always really believed in it as well. We've always really thought this is a campaign that that has a potential to really sort of help shift culture, and and we're just committed to it each year. So it's a bit of a passion project, become a second job now, really. But we love it. That's in a nutshell.
That's awesome, Ryan. I love the particular focus around kind of the environmental aspects, the footprint, as you mentioned there. That was certainly my initial angle, and then the rest of those elements that you talk of, kind of for me, kind of were sort of like secondary and tertiary, and I'm still learning, to be quite honest, in that space. So really really fascinating. Would love to come back to it in a second on the project, but it'd be great to kind of bring in Shireen at this point, and Shireen, just to talk about your kind of journey, because it sounds like there'd be some similarities, but also some real differences to Ryan's.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Jim. So I became vegan in 2013, and my initial motivation was really the ethical arguments for removing animals from the plate, essentially. I had been vegetarian since 2001, but I hadn't really been a very conscious vegetarian. I sort of thought, well, I've stopped eating meat, so that's the best I can do for the animals. But something or some discussions or probably conversations with my sisters actually led me to look further into the realities of the dairy and the egg industry. And it became clear that, vegetarianism isn't enough. And if we want to prevent the torture and slaughter of animals, essentially, the only way to go forward is veganism. So that was the reason. And a bit like Ryan said, you sort of have to unlearn everything you think you know about nutrition. And despite the fact that I'm a medical doctor, my nutrition education was very minimal and very conventional from my medical student days. So in my journey of learning how to feed myself on a vegan diet, I came across a wealth of academic and scientific literature that supported a healthy plant-based diet as being one of the best choices you can make for your own health, and then of course for the environment and the planet in general. So that's how I became vegan.
Was there a fair bit of skepticism, Shireen, in the community, perhaps the medical community, that you sort of circulated in at that time when you started to vocalize this, or were people relatively on board with you?
Yeah, well, so I think, like with most things, there's always a mixed response. So anything from, you need meat for protein, or where do you get your B12? The usual questions from omnivores, to those that do understand that the closer you get to 100% plant-based diet, that the greater the benefits for human health. But then coming up with the excuses, oh, but I like cheese, or I like my meat and things. So a mixture. But I think in general, certainly back in 2013, I don't think many of my friends and colleagues were probably well averse in the actual scientific literature, other than accepting that diets that are high in fruits and vegetables are healthy, because that's general public health messaging for the last decade. So so a mixture really. But I think, having put myself out there as a vegan doctor, I've met more and more people within the UK, and certainly health professionals who, think along the same way as myself. So there really, really is a growing community that is advocating for more plant-based diets.
Yeah, I can absolutely imagine there is. There seems to be a groundswell of movement towards it, and absolutely no doubt in part due to the work of projects like No Meat May. So Shireen, as we just mentioned, there's definitely a movement towards veganism. So I'm kind of not surprised almost that there's probably more medical professionals who are readily accepting moving towards a more plant-based diet is the right route to go. What's kind of led you to getting involved in particular with campaigns like No Meat May?
Yeah, well, so I think, with all grassroots movements, we all have to work together for a shared goal. And, I saw the campaign on social media and reached out to them to ask if they needed some support from health professionals, because, as we've mentioned, they're the first to question the nutritional adequacy of a plant-based diet if they're not fully averse with the scientific literature. I haven't mentioned yet, but back in 2017, I founded a non-profit organisation that provides science-based education and advocacy on healthy plant-based diets, predominantly aimed at health professionals, but also the general public, through events and conferencing and our educational website. So I thought it would be a nice connection and partnership to be supporting No Meat May in what this May has become so poignant for a lot of people, given the links between our interaction with animals and the outbreak of coronavirus, or COVID-19 as it's known.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely seen that in the sort of circles I move in with regard kind of veganism and the connection with kind of the way we sort of farm animals on a sort of global scale, and in particular, I suppose there's an area though that I sometimes wonder whether, because I'm in this social media bubble maybe of where you sort of are funneled towards other vegans, that I wonder if there's almost in that community there's this real connection being made. And Ryan, I'd just love to get your view, with the campaign, running as it is now, and as Shireen says, like right in this particular kind of historic and quite seismic moment, whether you're seeing that connection being made sort of on a more broader scale. Like, is it a connection that is being made, or is that still very much like the frontier of the campaign of No Meat May this particular year?
Yeah, good question. And I think we just scale back a couple of months, like when we were planning to roll out No Meat May, and then this, COVID took off in terms of, the whole world shut down, and we were just like, maybe we shouldn't do it this year, but we decided to push on with it because, if you like, all the big reasons why we do it and why we need to keep keep the world shifting in this direction is they're not going away. Even if we're in lockdown. So we agreed to push on, and what was interesting is that we've found we've had the most successful campaign ever in terms of recruitment numbers and people, and also that, if you like, the cost of recruiting. We're very much a social media campaign, and we get better each year at how we promote the campaign, how we connect with people. But we just we were really overwhelmed by the amount of people, and pleasantly surprised by the amount of people taking part. So we did a survey before it kicked off, and we asked people around their motivations, and gave them 15 motivations, if you like, for why they participate, and they could choose more than one, because most of us are motivated by more than one reason. And almost 40% of people ticked the box that said they were concerned with the basically meat production or the meat industry and public health issues such as COVID or pandemics such as COVID. So so almost 1 in 2, I'd say, we're sort of we're getting close to 40, just close to 40% motivated. That was one of their motivations. So I know, even just anecdotally, I know friends of who we've been pushing for years to get involved for different reasons, and the environment or animals or health just didn't sort of connect, but they're seeing it in a different light now with with what's going on with coronavirus and understanding this word zoonosis or zoonotics, which no one used before, but they're sort of understanding these infectious diseases, and you're seeing more journalism and more investigative journalism looking at where, I mean, I didn't know until a couple of months back that Ebola and HIV that sort of came out in the 80s is sort of connected to bushmeat that was the eating of exotic animals in Africa, and then the connection of that back to basically big fishing trawlers that came through the coasts of Africa and took out the small fishing industry, and those guys basically had to feed their family, went inland and started trading in bushmeat. So you just sort of see that this capitalist, profit-driven, meat-centered food system that's driving it, as well as what actually happens within the factory farms or within these intensive unnatural environments that we create to produce meat at a really cheap cost. So it's so it's different angles you can look at it from, and I think, let's say, some of the articles are coming out now starting to connect those perspectives up in a way that and we're looking at things in a way that we didn't before. So coming back to your original question, I think I think it is illuminating it for a lot of people, and there's people that are doing No Meat May. My friends' partners who would never have done it before, but they're like, no, this is the reason I will do it. Which is interesting.
No, I think you're right. When something is this disruptive to people's lives and they've lost loved ones, and it's affected communities in such a way, I imagine it's probably everyone is probably in a state of kind of introspection, if you like, and trying to figure out exactly where these kind of things come from. Shireen, I'd love to get your view on something here, because what I have seen a bit of is a connection with wet markets and so on, and it feels almost I sometimes see it and feel it's a little bit not reductive, because it is connected, obviously, or we believe connected to this particular outbreak. But would you, in your experience, say that there is just as much concern from on a sort of longer term basis, whether it be zoonotic diseases or perhaps even just chronic illness in general, with our continuation down the path of a meat heavy, like I'd say typically Western, but I think it's kind of accelerated over the last few decades. But would you say there's perhaps a concern that isn't quite being highlighted enough, that it is too reductive to around the wet market kind of idea?
Yeah, for sure. I think, me as a medical doctor, what this pandemic has brought to the forefront are two main aspects. Firstly, as we've been discussing, where do all these new and emerging infections come from? But also, if we are going to be in a world of new epidemic and pandemic infections, then who are the people that can actually cope with these viruses and illnesses the best, and who are suffering the worst ill health and sadly ultimately death? And those questions and aspects come back down to our diet choices. So the initial the initial attempt to call this a Chinese virus or a particular problem with wet markets, as you say, was very much limiting the actual consequences of our whole farming and use of animals for food, essentially. So this particular virus, yes, it's linked most likely back to the trade in wild animals or sort of exotic animals through the wet market. But we only have to look back to 2009 when we had an H1N1 swine flu outbreak, which was obviously from farming pigs and came sort of from Mexico and North America, essentially. And even as we speak, there are small outbreaks of really deadly bird flu amongst chicken farms in Hong Kong and China that are having to be contained by slaughtering the infected animals. So, yes, wildlife trade, wet markets, but also our conventional intensive factory farming of any animal is increasing our risk of future epidemic and pandemic infections. And we have to understand that 90% of the meat that's eaten on this planet is produced from industrially farmed animals. So, the obvious response is, oh, well, I only buy organic, grass-fed, et cetera. But actually, we can't feed our planet on that type of meat, even if we choose to continue to eat meat. So I think that's really important. And the other aspect, there's a health professional that has really been startling to me, is that, this virus is affecting those with underlying health conditions the worst. So they're more likely to end up in hospital and in ICU. And sadly, people with underlying chronic health conditions are more likely to die from this virus. And when we look back at the root cause of these chronic illnesses, it comes back to our diet and lifestyle, and the aspects of diet that need to be addressed by looking at our really unhealthy food environment, is that our diet is, in the typical Western pattern, too high in processed food and too high in animal-derived foods such as red and processed meat. And those two factors are really leading to an epidemic of chronic illness such as overweight and obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, which are highlighted as particular illnesses that are increasing your risk of doing badly with this virus.
Yeah, and I suppose as you say it there, just thinking about it, those kind of illnesses, whether it be heart disease, certain cancers that have got links to carcinogens in processed meat, etc. Those, I imagine, just from a sheer impact, like death toll, devastation to families and communities, are going on all the time, if you like. It's I guess heart disease and cancers are pandemics that are just happening
for sure.
on a day-to-day basis, right?
Yeah. I mean, we know even prior to this epidemic, we have known that unhealthy diets are the top risk factor for death and disability around the world, and they contribute to around 1 in 5 deaths. And that's no different in the UK or Australia. 1 in 5 deaths are caused by our diet choices. And when you look down the list of what an unhealthy diet is, the top 5 sort of top risk factors are, firstly, diets high in salt. So that reflects our increasing reliance on processed and packaged foods. But then the next 4 top risk factors are that we're not eating enough whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds. So we're not eating enough of the whole plant foods, and we're eating too much of the processed and animal-derived foods. And as I say, we know intuitively, we've known since we were children that fruits and vegetables are good for health. And, if you eat colourful fruits and vegetables with whole grains, beans, nuts and seeds, then you will have the best chance that you can of reducing your risk of ill health.
Absolutely. Ryan, as we sort of were discussing there about kind of heart disease and so on and so forth. Have you seen, I guess, like a particular intention from folks who are kind of pledging to No Meat May connected to those kind of elements? Sort of is that been an increasing trend as we've seen that those trends increase? I guess globally, and as Shireen mentioned, sort of particularly in Western countries, have we seen that in your kind of uptake from folks who have perhaps been impacted by those kind of illnesses?
Yeah, 100%. And again, this year as well, I think as we're all sort of in lockdown and sort of focused on, there's so much, I guess, attention on health and public health. And I mentioned before those motivations that we surveyed. So the number one motivation this year was health, and it was 82% of people who signed up said that one of the main motivations for them was the health and reducing the risk of chronic diseases, such as the ones Shireen was mentioning there. So we I think there's a growing awareness around that as well. Again, probably more media and more conversations coming through, and people understanding that a plant-based diet is the best for health outcomes and reducing your risk of so many chronic diseases. So that's becoming more prevalent. And also we have a Facebook group. We have almost 5,000 people in there that are sharing and supporting each other. It's a lot of recipe swapping, but what we're seeing in there too is there's very much a health focus. So when we completely want to see the end of the violence, the systemic violence with factory farmed animals. But when those sort of posts come up, people engage with them. But when it comes up around health and around, whether it be weight loss or improving your blood pressure or that sort of stuff, they tend to kick off a little bit more, I think. So, it's an interesting one. I think, it is definitely a major motivation for people.
Yeah, I can imagine it's particularly at the moment. Just going through kind of No Meat May's site and some of the support that the organisation offers. Be good to just get a bit of a synopsis of that, really, because there's a huge amount of resources and information available that No Meat May offer to people pledging. So, be good to kind of get a bit of an idea of that.
Yeah, cool. So we're all about doing it. So if you're going to do it right. And we're all about doing it, being smart and using evidence-based materials. So we sort of connected, obviously, with Shireen this year for this campaign, and for prior campaigns, Dr. Kate Marsh, who's probably most preeminent Australian dietitian in the plant-based world. So we sort of she writes a lot of our material to share with people to give them an introduction to the essential nutrients that they need, and we sort of will introduce those to, communicate those to people through emails and through social media posts and in our Facebook group. So we're very keen on getting people to do it right and make sure they're getting their iron, their protein, their B12, and learn about calcium and plant-based sources, etc. So that's a big part of our support. We also we send emails every few days, 2 to 3 days. We send an email out to everyone who signs up, and we encourage them to join this Facebook group. And I think this is the one thing that I'm most inspired by, is this global community that comes around this challenge, because we have people in all corners of the States and the UK, and New Zealand this year has really taken off, and Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, obviously, Philippines. We've got all these people all in this group at different hours of the day, cooking up different things, bringing their culture and their experience and their questions to this group and sharing with each other. So that is, that's sort of was the support thing, but it's actually in some ways become a bit of a promotional or selling point, if you like, is that join this global community that are there to support you through the challenge. Because a lot of people will sign up, maybe they're the only person in their family, or they might live in a small regional town and they don't know anyone else doing it, but you join this group and all of a sudden 5,000 people doing it, and you connect and you build relationships throughout the month. So that's really awesome. As I mentioned, the emails, we have an Instagram where we share a recipe a day. My partner Guy, who's a co-founder, has a brilliant sense of humor, and he sort of we bring in a tip a day for No Meat May, and there's we bring a sense of humor to it and a playfulness to it, and understand, on day 3 or day 4, that's when your cravings are going to kick in, and day 5 or day 6, and that's when your fiber kicks in and you really start noticing your body working in a way that it hasn't before. So we sort of bring those elements and the experience of doing the campaign for 8 years through those 31 days, and drop support and motivational tips, etc., throughout the month. They're probably the main elements. We survey people every year and get their feedback on how we can improve it. But people are really they're in it for the food as well. We can sort of talk about, and we do talk about the big motivations and the big 4 reasons, and the big issues with overconsumption. But at the end of the day, it's all about that food, and so we get as many recipes, and we've got meal plans on our website. This year, we've brought in online cooking demos, which have really taken off in terms of bringing a bit of cooking joy into people's lounge rooms and to their lives, so they can learn. Like tonight, in about 2 hours' time, we're going to learn how to make a vegan seafood pasta with Romy London from UK. And last week, we learned how to make falafel and hummus and a Middle Eastern feast from an Australian chef. Next week, we've got a series of 3 next weekend. So that's sort of, I think, what people are interested in, as well as skilling up and learning exactly how do you practically do this stuff? How do you replace meat on your plate? And or how do you feed the family and them all feel full and satisfied using plants? So all that practical stuff, I think, is really integral to the campaign as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a couple of points I want to pick up on in there that really fascinate me. I think the first one, and I want to bring Shireen into this and get your perspective, Shireen, is both of you come at veganism from an awesome angle of animal welfare, environment, etc. But the health being kind of critical to this as well, particularly as we've talked about at this time. One of the things that I've kind of noticed, and you guys with all of your wealth of experience will have certainly noticed over the years, is that as veganism becomes more popular, if you like, and people switch to it, that companies kind of figure out how to monetize it, and there's definitely a groundswell of what we'd probably describe as vegan junk food, if you like. And I kind of wrestle with it one or two ways. I kind of think it's a good intro for people, but on the flip side, is there a potential harm there? So I'd love to get your view on it, and I suppose also just more power to you guys for the recipes that you talk about there, Ryan, just leading with health. But Shireen, I'd love to get your view on kind of the rise of vegan junk food and whether you think it has a place or not, and does it concern you?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's a excellent discussion point. Clearly having vegan alternatives to our sort of comfort foods is a way of getting more people to explore veganism, and will only be of benefit to the animals and the environment, I have no doubt. But yeah, I'm deeply worried for our personal health. At the moment, we know in the UK that 50% or more of what people put into their shopping baskets is classified as ultra-processed food. And that's for, a predominantly omnivorous population. We know that these ultra-processed foods that are really far removed from any sort of starting ingredient is associated with adverse health outcomes, so increases the risk of weight gain, of cardiovascular disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, the list goes on and on. And so if we're going to bring more people into this vegan movement, but only to transition them to ultra-processed vegan food, we really, really are not going to do our own health any good. And it's going to, fuel the fire of all these people that find they don't feel so well on a vegan diet. So I think the place for them is a sort of enticement to try non-meat alternatives, and as a transition food, as people skill up and get their knowledge base up to speed in order to feed themselves and their family with a healthy vegan diet. It makes it easy, but beyond just being a transition food or as an occasional treat, I think it really has no place in a healthy diet. But as I say, this situation is no different from the typical UK or Australian resident. We've got into this, for so many reasons, but driven, as you say, by the corporate sector and by industry profit and shareholder profit, that we have got into this cycle of really relying on processed foods, losing our skills of cooking and our knowledge of what constitutes a healthy diet.
Yeah. And Ryan, have you definitely seen this kind of this growth in it as well? Is this sort of exclusive to the UK from my standpoint, or is it something that as you've seen positives and negatives in Australia too?
Yeah, 100%. I think both. I think the convenience factor is a big part of what people's decisions when they're in the supermarket and they're buying food and when they're in the kitchen. I think there are good and bad products, and I think there's a big news story hitting Australia and probably internationally, I think, around the sodium content of plant-based products and plant-based meat alternatives in particular. So I think that's one that we sort of encourage people to look out for and to get low sodium products. But I think they definitely do play a part. In terms of if you've got to feed the kids and you're working and you're you're a single mum or whatever, or regardless, if you've to reach for the freezer and be able to get some plant-based chicken schnitzels out and just cook them up with 3 veg can be a lot easier and a way to, I guess, find your plant legs, if you like, or plant-based legs. So I think they definitely play a role in terms of I guess helping people to shift into plant-based eating. But I think what we've noticed too this year, in particular, is with people being in lockdown, people spending a lot more time at home, there is a lot more people are spending a lot more time in their kitchen and making the healthier foods, the stews and the using legumes and soaking them and actually spending more time and putting more love into their food, which may be a bit of a luxury at the moment. But we're hoping that that I think when we come out of lockdown and out of this COVID situation, that it's something that people are enjoying and they stick with, because it doesn't really have to take that much extra time, I don't think. Maybe initially when you're finding your feet, but once you get your pressure cooker or your slow cooker and you learn how to soak your chickpeas and your broad beans, etc., then get into a little bit of get a few favourites, then it's quite easy to eat healthy and healthy whole foods, and that's when, as Shireen mentioned, that's when you get the real benefits of it and you feel all the energy, etc.
Yeah, I'm with you actually. This situation, if anything, has sort of slowed the pace of life. For certainly for me anyway. I know it's not the same for everybody, and very very conscious of those who are still very much on the front lines. Allowing us all to kind of have this moment of introspection to some extent. But yeah, I've definitely found that myself. That I've after sort of three going on for 4 years of veganism, I'm starting to you sort of start to slip back into some old habits as things come out, new products, vegan cheeses, this, that, and the other, and it's easy to slip back. And this moment in time has allowed me to pause somewhat, and even as somebody who is vegan already, No Meat May gives a great source of support with that. And talking of support, actually, and I wanted to go back to the other point that I wanted to pick up on from what you said a while back, Ryan, was about communities and how important they are. And obviously, Shireen, you're kind of, I suppose, building, or have been building for some time now, a community of medical professionals who are you're upskilling in the world of plant-based nutrition. Be good to hear a little bit more about that, really, and the successes of it, and how receptive the medical world in your sphere has been.
Thanks, Jim. So, as you say, I mean, my passion for plant-based diets and realizing that there wasn't much education and advocacy from a health perspective in the UK led me to found an organisation called Plant-Based Health Professionals UK, which sort of tells you exactly what we are. We're a membership organisation that is registered as a community interest company in the UK. So we are run by volunteers and are a no-profit organisation who provide education and advocacy on healthy plant-based diets, or a whole food plant-based diet, which is the sort of terminology used to describe a healthy vegan diet. So what we've been doing is, as you say, building a community. So we have membership. Our membership is actually open to everybody because, as you know yourselves, veganism and plant-based diets and the curiosity of it is really a grassroots movement, and it's being demanded. The education is really being demanded from the from the general public first and foremost. And the health professionals have been lagging behind in their interest. So we're not just a health professional organisation. We have members that are general public who are just interested in optimising their diet. And we've been running annual conferences since 2018, which have been really popular. We have lots of online resources to help individuals and families make sure that they are transitioning to a plant-based diet in a healthy way. And I think probably the most important thing that I've been able to contribute to within the UK is the development of a specific course. And this is aimed at health professionals, but I have developed and facilitate an online course at Winchester University, where I work 1 day a week, and it's called Plant-Based Nutrition and a Sustainable Diet for Optimal Health, where we have 6 weeks of a facilitated online course with lectures and notes and discussions that take you through all the reasons why a predominantly plant-based diet is healthy, not only for humans, but the most sustainable one for our planet going forward. And as I say, it's for health professionals who are working in a clinical environment where they want to arm themselves with the evidence so that they can use it to help their patients and clients move towards a more healthy, sustainable lifestyle, with diet being at the core of that. And it's been incredibly popular. I've been sort of sold out in inverted commas for a while. It runs every academic term, and we're trying to sort of facilitate more and more people coming online. But I'm about to start the third run on Tuesday with over 70 people signed up to the course and already selling out for next academic year. So the demand for this has been incredible, and because it's online, it's international, and I have certainly had international participants. And our big coup was that Michael Clapper, the one of the forefathers of plant-based nutrition and its use in the medical field, took the course last time and has written us a wonderful testimonial. So we're trying to get the word out there. And actually, I've got an Australian health professional, Ryan, that's going to sit at this time as well. So you will have heard of your sort of sister organisation, as it were, in Australia, called Doctors for Nutrition. They do exactly what I do, and I'm connected with them. And one of their founder members is going to take the course and sort of hopefully, spearhead its popularity in Australia as well.
Oh, that's amazing, Shireen. Like, what an impact that you're going to make through there. And I love the fact that we talk about building communities. Those 70 people on that one course alone, I mean, the impact they're going to have on their patients and the people that they treat. I mean, it's it goes far beyond just the course itself. So
I really hope so. I do. And I feel really fortunate that we have an institution like Winchester University. At the core of its values are social justice and sustainability, which clearly resonate with me. And their Vice Chancellor, Prof. Joy Carter, is vegan. And there seem to be quite a lot of vegan staff on campus for one reason or other. So it's a great community to be part of for myself as a professional as well.
Amazing. I love that, and I love the fact that you've opened it up as well beyond kind of medical professionals, not necessarily the course, but the wider kind of membership of the group. And just coming back to the point you were making earlier, Ryan, about how critical community is for people transitioning, and something like No Meat May is providing this community, or at least the kickstart into the community. A particular point that I guess will pose to both of you really, but I don't know about your experience, and probably Shireen, you were medically equipped to deal with this, but when you transition to veganism, and even beyond is still a day-to-day occurrence for me. And I'm a father of a little boy who's 2 years old, who's obviously been brought up vegan as well. And so whenever the word is mentioned, particularly with the little one, there is almost a need on my part to be equipped with all manner of information, whether that be kind of information about the global impact, because somebody once read an article that actually said that I don't know, some plant-based food source was worse than grass-fed meat, that kind of stuff. Or you have to defend sources of B12 or this, that, or the other. Ryan, you supply kind of the basis of information for folks through No Meat May. How critical in helping people transition do you feel being equipped from that knowledge base is, and what are your tips for coping with those conversations as someone who is transitioning?
You're right. It's a good question. I think you're right. I mean, we talk to the four big reasons. So we'll sort of give people information on the environmental impacts and food security issues and all the health ones we've spoken about, and also obviously factory farming. So we'll sort of give people evidence-based information. We always come back to credible sources and include hyperlinks for people who want to read more. So we don't sort of bombard them. We just sort of give them a flavor of here's some topics and here's some really credible places to go and learn more. So that's sort of our approach to it. And I think, people come at it from different reasons. If people are just in it for the health or just in it for the environment, that's their motivation. And as they go, they will often learn other reasons or other I guess find other reasons why the diet is a good diet or why this change is a good change. So, I think within the community as well, but it is like this microcosm of the broader community or the broader world. So you'll have people come in and at different levels of knowledge and share information. And we have vegans in the group who have done MMA a few years ago and are now vegan, and they'll provide support to people who are maybe just giving up land animals this year and don't quite understand the issue with overfishing. So it's kind of you have people at different stages of I guess awareness or consciousness around all these issues, and we sort of monitor it in a way to make sure that people aren't we support every step, every baby step, and give people information, but try not to bombard them as well. Try and let them kind of learn at their own pace. So it's a bit of an art form. It's no, and it can get a bit ugly in there at times, a bit messy in that Facebook group at times when you've got level 7 vegans with people who are might not have the best communication skills and don't understand issues with and post a picture of a farmed piece of salmon on a mashed potato, and things can kick off. But I think we just try and arm people with those tools, as you say, so that they can I guess it kind of cements what they're doing and provides that I guess intellectualizes it in a way of as to when you get those cravings or when your habits kick in, it gives you something to hook onto to say, no, I'm going to move past this because there's a bigger thing at play that I'm motivated by. So
I think there's a good lesson to be learned there about sort of, I suppose, kindness, tolerance, but also sharing information as is right to do so. So yeah, really think you're spot on with that level of messaging. Shireen, I've got another question around kind of health and just sort of circling back a little bit to the to I guess the beyond the current situation, but the potential health crisis, I guess, that potentially could be stored up for us through continuing down the omnivorous route. And that question relates to antibiotic resistance, which I've heard throughout my vegan journey linked many times to the consumption of meat. And so I'd just love to get your view on how big an issue you believe that to be, and whether you also would attribute that to to an omnivorous diet, or do you think it's there's other issues behind that particular potential crisis?
Yeah, so antibiotic resistance really is a threat, and we are, starting to talk about, how we deal with a post-antibiotic era, which is really quite worrying to even consider. Myself in a hospital dealing with immunosuppressed patients, we are reliant on antibiotics on a day-to-day basis. So, in terms of the scale of the problem, there was a report commissioned in 2016 by the UK government, and what it stated was that in 2016 there were about 700,000 deaths a year globally that were caused by antibiotic-resistant infections. But the rather shocking statistic that they quoted in that report was that if nothing changes and we carry on the way we are, then by 2050, we could be looking at 10 million deaths globally from antibiotic-resistant infections alone. So that is just inconceivable to consider. But if we carry on as we are, that's what we're heading for. Now, it wouldn't be honest to say that us eating meat is the only cause, but it's clear that industrial factory farming of animals is a major contributor to this problem. So globally, about 70% of antibiotics produced is used in some way in animal farming. So in the UK, I think it's about 36% of all antibiotics are used in animal agriculture. Whereas somewhere like the US, I've seen figures of up to 70% of antibiotics being used. And although we're no longer, supposed to be using antibiotics as a growth promoter, I think just the conditions that animals are in, their close quarters, the easy transmission of infections between animals, the intensity of things like, milking and the rates of mastitis just necessitate a continual use of antibiotics in the factory farming sector. And that breeds antibiotic resistant bugs in the animals that then somehow get into our food system. There's runoff of manure, there's contamination of the land, the water, the soil, and the plants that are being grown on the soil. So that is certainly a major factor that needs to be addressed, and it needs a global intervention. Individual farms and farmers are not going to be able to make these changes. It needs a systemic and legislative a drive to change the way we eat and our food system. And we, as this comes back to, we need to shift to more of a plant-based food system in general, and really reduce our reliance on animal food.
Do you feel a level of confidence may be perpetuated or not, as the case may be, by the COVID situation, Shireen, that we will be able to make the kind of, see the necessary connections and make the necessary changes, I guess, globally, like you speak of at sort of very high level, in order to ensure our continued sort of health and the survival of the planet and so on and so forth? Do you feel confident in that we can shift to a sort of ultimately plant-based food system?
No, sadly, I have to say that I don't feel confident, because just in the narratives in the media and what's being discussed in the articles, there's very little airtime being given to the issues that we're discussing today. And there's so many forces acting against our shift to a plant-based diet. What I can see being focused on in the medical community is a drive for developing an antiviral drug and a vaccine. And those are the things that seem to be hitting the headlines. I can't see much action being given to dealing with the root cause. So I don't feel optimistic, but I feel that there is enough time for us to make a difference, and all of us have to individually and in our communities and the groups where we have influence be sharing this important message like you are today.
And Ryan's sort of same question really. Like, how confident do you feel about that kind of eventual shift, that we will make those necessary changes?
Yeah, look, I've got to say I'm sort of similar to Shireen in terms of just seeing how slow we move. And as I say, we're seeing this great growth in the campaign. We're up 300% this year, which is up from 10,000 to 34,000 this year, which is a huge growth. But yeah, it's a tricky one. But I think I think what's coming through with COVID-19 is there might not actually be a vaccine that's going to be effective, and some of these, like the treatment of it might be, from what I've heard, and Shireen would know better than I, but it might become like the common cold, which is something that we can't actually vaccinate against. In which case, all we can do is treat the symptoms of it and or try and lessen it. And we don't know where we're at with this crisis at the moment. If we're just at the beginning of it, which I think we are actually, in terms of how we restructure our economies and our systems and rebuild things, restart things when we all come out of lockdown. So I think there's a lot of question marks, a lot of unknowns, but I think we've got to start pushing people to look at that root cause, and I think more people have to step forward and do that, because we wouldn't. I heard it put with recently an article about terrorism. If we had all these terrorists coming from one particular cell or one particular group, we would find the root cause of that and we would address that. We would go in and we would try and stop that. Yet we have all these infectious diseases and or chronic diseases, and we see this one that they're all coming, or most of them are coming from this one place, and we won't go there. We don't go there as a collective because it impacts on our culture. So I think if more people with platforms, more people with use their voice to sort of challenge that, I think that's what's needed. I think we need more people to stand up and you're seeing that. You're seeing more people, more celebrities and very influential people move to plant-based diets for different reasons. So I think to hear some of them talk about this denial that we have, and I think so much of it is psychological. So much of our eating habits and our resistance to change is this the psychology that we have around meat and this denial and all these multi levels of sort of psychology that we have with our food. If we can sort of face that and get to that root cause, then then it'll accelerate the shift. But the shift is definitely happening. It's just a question of with things like COVID, how much faster can it push things along. So I'm probably a bit more confident, but I think we need those people to stand up and make more noise and get it into the news.
Well, I think both of you are absolutely in that space of pushing the message forward in the right and positive way. So a huge thank you to both of you. Time is getting away from us here, but I would like to just make sure that the folks out there know how to sign up for No Meat May and how to find you as well, Shireen. So let's start, Shireen, with where's best to sort of find you and maybe even join that community that you've built.
Yeah, thank you. So our website is plantbasedhealthprofessionals.com, and from there you'll see all our links to social media, so Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So plantbasedhealthprofessionals.com.
Awesome. And if we want to encourage some folks to sign up to No Meat May, Ryan, where do we go about finding you?
Yeah, so we're at nomeatmay.net is our website. Getting towards the end of May now, but it's still it will still have our daily posts on Instagram and our Facebook page as well. And as I mentioned before, the Facebook community group, which has some amazing recipe sharing, and we've created a library of topics of things that have been shared this May. So if you jump in and join the No Meat May community group, you'll have access to all those resources. We go 12 months a year, even though the focus is all in May. We're there all year round. So come and join in.
Well, I really recommend people do. I mean, the site is full of information, and even as someone who's been vegan for a while now, that it's still invaluable. And even just being part of the community, the recipe sharing, all the rest of it, it is fantastic. And I think moving us all not just to veganism, but kind of as close to whole foods, plant-based as we can. I think is a battle we're all on, especially with all that vegan junk food out there that we talked about. But thank you so much for your time. Both of you, make sure you stay safe and hopefully talk to you again.
Good on you, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shireen.